is where we discuss the possibilities.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Diet Doc Life Mastery Podcast. I'm Dr. Kori Propst here with Dr. Joe Klemczewski, and we're talking today about science versus fiction. We're back in that area, and Joe, I wanted to address today and kind of pick apart a little bit some research that recently came out by Dr. Carol Dweck, and most people would recognize her out of Stanford University. She wrote the book Mindset, very involved in research regarding motivation, right? Mm-hmm. So she and colleagues just did a study recently on the difference and the impact of believing or subscribing to the phrase follow your bliss, follow your passion, or find your passion versus develop your passion. And I do these, I have Google search terms that I do, so I'll get research that comes out like this that relate to motivation and mastery and things like that. So when this came up, I was like, ooh, this sounds interesting, this sounds fun. You actually, because this is a quote that I've heard you say before quite often, which is follow your bliss. Mm-hmm. And is that Joseph Campbell? Did Joseph Campbell say something like that? Okay. So it's funny because I have never really, when I've heard you say that, follow your bliss, it kind of stops me in my tracks. And I get this, I don't know what my bliss is. And follow what? It never really made sense to me because, and this is what she found actually, was that individuals who subscribe to this, follow your passion, find your passion, feel a sense of because it undermines how interests really develop. Follow your bliss, follow your passion assumes that there's a passion, there's a bliss out there already, and we're actually either born with it or we need to discover it, and it's inherent, right? As opposed to develop your passion, which is more exploratory and it's curious and it's developmental. It's an active process, whereas the follow or find it's much more passive. So if it's follow, it's like the passion is there and it's just going to guide you, which kind of says you don't really have to do any work. There's no effort that needs to be involved in this in order to kind of find discover a purpose for yourself. What do you think about that so far?
Well, while I love the fact that linguistically Dr. Dweck has studied, because words do matter and it does create an entire different synaptic reaction in our brain, but I'm going to have to defend my boy, Joe Campbell, because that's out of context. That's not what he meant. And first of all, remember, he was somebody who came up into his field of kind of social anthropology through the 40s, 50s, 60s. And so he didn't have all of this social science research and linguistical analysis to base his work on. He was simply saying, don't work in a cubicle your whole life. Don't do a job you hate. You only get one life, so you might as well go in a direction that you love to go, which I know you would agree with. So it was never just follow in terms of float along the river of life. It was pick what you want to do and then, go work your ass off. Mm-hmm. But to your point, there was another, I wish I could remember, somebody online, some online, vlogger, video podcast in the field of motivation said this. And I remember it had impact because it was a psychologist of some sort. Mm-hmm. And he was also attacking this same theory or wording of just picking what you want to do and then expecting the world to respond and everything's going to be rosy. He said, no, be responsible. You know, if you're working at McDonald's, then work at McDonald's and work to your best and crush it and do whatever you need to succeed so that you can move up to the next rung, so you can follow your bliss. But I know you don't like the word follow. So build it, but you're going to make it happen. So tell me about this research. How did they set up the study and what did they find?
Sure. So, okay, they did 2 studies actually. In the first study, there were 470 participants, and they conducted it to really find out if people view interests as fixed qualities that are inherent, like you're born with it, or qualities that require time, require effort to develop, and how that affects the way that they pursue their passions. So she brought it back to her original fixed versus growth mindset research. The fixed mindset being, you know, I believe that my intelligence is fixed. I am born with intelligence or I don't have it. Versus the growth mindset, which is that intelligence is developed through hard work and exploration and challenge, right? We move toward challenge. So students in the study identified themselves as either techies, okay, and these are the people who they identified with interests related to like the STEM topics, or they identified themselves as the fuzzies. I just laugh out loud. Sometimes research is funny. And these are the people that identified with like the arts and the humanities. And each student had to read 2 articles, okay? One related to tech fields and then one related to an arts field. And what they found is that students with a fixed mindset were less open to reading the article outside of their field of interest, okay? Now, in the second study, the researchers had the participants watch a video about black holes and the origin of the universe. And then when they were asked to read a challenging article on the same topic, what they found is that excitement really declined. But it declined most significantly among the fixed mindset students. So, I mean, really what they're showing is that individuals with a fixed mindset, and this isn't like revolutionary research, they're really confirming some things that they've already known and had researched in the past, but they're showing that individuals with a fixed mindset find it more difficult to engage in that active process of developing an interest. They're less exploratory because they're already born with what they're supposed to be kind of doing and what they're supposed to move into as a career. So I think the thing to remember is that if yes, like you said, language is super important. And I work with my clients on this all the time. You know, I just had a session the other day with a client about intuitive eating versus intelligent eating. Just to give you an example, as she's talking to me about wanting to try intuitive eating, and her whole tone changes when she says intuitive eating. There's this pressure behind her words. There's a heaviness. It's not a joyful discussion for her to be talking about intuitive eating. And I shared that with her. I'm like, as much as you say that you really want to try this, I'm not hearing that in your voice. There's not positive energy behind what you're saying and what you're expressing that you want to move into. That's like heavy. I'm feeling anxious listening to you talk about intuitive eating. And so I said, talk to me about what it is. When you say intuitive eating, what are all the associations you have with it? And this is kind of what they were getting in this research, the associations that someone with a fixed mindset has, right? So my client is, she's explaining these things to me, and I'm like, can we go through these one by one? Because everything you're saying to me doesn't sound like it's expansive for you. But some of these other things, they sound more like intelligent eating as opposed to intuitive eating. And she goes, oh, I like that word. And her whole tone changes. That's how important language is, and understanding the associations and the beliefs that we have attached to certain words. So I think the thing to remember is, if we think that our interests and our passions are inherent, that we're born with them, then once we find them, then there's no reason to explore, right? There's no reason to go read other things and discover other ways of thinking or ways of being. And I mean, I think you would agree, we were just in a having conversation about this, Joe, is one of our most important kind of principles for living is to become self-aware and to grow and to evolve. And the only kind of foundational way for that to occur is to ask questions and explore and discover and talk to people and get new perceptions. And someone with a fixed mindset isn't going to move into that sort of behavior.
So you just used one of my favorite words, which is foundational.
Yeah.
And that's because as a schema, as a life schema, something that anybody who's not self-aware is a slave to is judgment, where everything has an element of being threat-based, and they must decide if that's something that I believe in or I don't. Am I supposed to be for this or against it? And they never get beyond that, to your point of just curiosity. I'll give you an example. Mm-hmm. I was listening to a speaker who has a very religious mindset. Like, he's trying to convince the world to believe exactly what he believes, and if you don't, you're going to die and go to hell. Mm-hmm. And he played this video of an actual Ivy League philosopher saying that if you are going to not believe in a deity, then you have to believe that there's a bit of meaninglessness, like you have to create your own meaning. But this particular speaker was focusing on that there's just nothing. You just die and there's nothing and your whole life is meaningless. And what this philosopher was actually saying was quite the opposite. Mm-hmm. It's that you have to, as Dr. Dweck is proving in her research, you have to make that meaning. When you do something for somebody, it's not, and this guy even used the phrase like, we get our hands dirty and we work for people and we go out and we serve because we know God smiles. And his point was that we need the approval, the workload, the task list, the right and wrong to know that we are being accepted by this deity. And all of that is a very, very fixed mindset. You follow the playbook instead of it's just a social need. You're doing it because you have empathy and people need your help like you need their help. And it doesn't matter. Dude, this was amazing to me. I got one more thing and then I'll shut up for a second. I got on the plane a couple days ago in Bologna, Italy to go to Amsterdam. Mm-hmm. It's 5:30 in the morning. 5:30 in the morning. And an Indian gentleman sits down next to me. And I love the Indian accent. It's my favorite accent ever. Mm-hmm. But he sits down. We're two totally different people. I mean, I'm from the West. He's from the East. We have nothing in common. We don't look the same. We don't dress the same. Except he pulls out this sandwich. And without hesitating, he reaches over and acts like, like, do you want some? Do you want some of my sandwich? Wow. I mean, who does that except a guy who just looks at you as a human being, right? And nothing else. Is thinking beyond himself. Absolutely. That is the quickest way to start suffering.
when we are the center of our own tiny, small little worlds, and they become smaller and smaller and smaller when we focus just on me.
Yeah. And so it doesn't surprise me. I'm glad Carol Dweck is doing this kind of research showing that openness, curiosity, acceptance, all the research we constantly talk about leads to more success, more happiness, better relationships, longevity, all of these things, because you're looking at humanity and the world around you is something to be part of collectively instead of isolate and shrink away from.
Well, we live in a very interdisciplinary world. You know, I think back to Dr. Dan Siegel in interpersonal neurobiology. He's found ways, and I mean, it's not a like if you look at all of the different sciences, anthropology, psychology, sociology, I mean, name them all, you're going to find commonalities. You just are going to. And so what develop your passion or develop your bliss or develop your purpose conveys is there's such a vast world out there and a vast amount of people with different experience levels and insights and thoughts and beliefs. The best way to develop your own is to draw upon all of those different insights. I heard a quote recently, and this would kind of be a good way, I think, to wrap up the podcast. But the quote goes like this. It brings it all together for me. When we take the time to reflect upon the way we see things, the way we see things changes. That's a growth mindset right there.
And I mean, to your entire point of interpreting the research, it's an active process. You have to get up every day and decide, you know, am I on the path I want to be creating instead of just, and again, it's just, you know, everything in context, right? It's not like every day has to be a grind and a pool of spreadsheets and blah, 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 but you just, it is an active process. You don't just follow a path predetermined for you. You create your opportunity. You create your success. You create your happiness. This took me years. We talked about this in a previous podcast. It took me years to really understand layer by layer, level by level, what it means to be able to truly be responsible for my own happiness and contentment.
Yeah.
And you're not relying on a friend, a spouse, anybody else, but I can just absolutely be that kind of self-determined person that I can invest in other people only when I'm already that centered.
Yeah. And we're kind of delving into the concept of non-attachment, which is not identifying and just shrouding ourselves in this is the one way that it is or that it's going to be or that it needs to be, like attaching, like grasping onto an outcome. But the non-attachment way of being is being open to whatever reality is in front of us each moment. There's no permanence to it. It's always changing. And if we aren't adopting a growth mindset, we're not going to be able to adapt to all of those changes that occur in our lives. And they're going to occur. If there's one thing that's certain, it's change. It's that. So. Well,
as a way of thanking you for presenting this research, Kori, I'm going to give you just a little nugget of how much your work can impact everybody. So I've talked a lot about being an introvert and wanting to become more initially interactive with people, not waiting for things to happen, because I can have that attitude of just, as Dr. Dweck would say, is wrong, just thinking it's going to happen instead of making it happen. So on my flight that was 7.5 hours from Amsterdam to Detroit, I sat next to a gentleman, different guy, and guess how much we talked?
Probably almost the whole time. Oh,
Nope,
zero.
zero. I said nothing to the guy the entire time. 7.5 hours. No talking. That's Joe the introvert. Here's what's funny.
It's Joe that's exhausted, and because you probably thought in that moment, like, I should really try to talk to the guy next to me. Like, that would be the bigger Joe.
I mean,
like, start a conversation. I mean, that's what goes through my head a lot of times, and then I forgive myself, and because there are those moments where I'm like, it's okay, Kori, you don't have to be on all the time.
Yeah. And it's fine. I didn't feel bad about that. I mean, he's sleeping, watching movies, we're doing our own thing. But here's what's funny is then 2 hours later, I'm at my gate coming to Little Evansville, Indiana, and there he is.
Oh.
And so I walked up to the guy and I'm like, wait a second, you were just in Bologna to Amsterdam and now you're going to Evansville, Indiana? And he's like, yeah, I used to teach at USI. Now I teach in Bologna.
Wow.
And I like, well, what do you teach? And he said, social linguistics. Exactly what you're talking about, linguistics, and social science is my game. And so, I exchange information and we're going to go out.
A big, awesome conversation there, Joe. 7 hours worth of.
Yeah, so we don't talk for 7 hours, but then we talk for 5 minutes, and we're now going to get together and have dinner and talk about all this good stuff. So that's what we could be missing out on if we're waiting for life to happen instead of, as Carol Dweck would say, developing it, using those active terms.
I look at it in situations where, I can feel myself kind of contract and go inward, and the thought in my head is like, no. My next thought is, wait, that feeling right there, Kori, that thought right there, that's an invitation. That is an invitation for you to move into a bigger, broader, more expansive Kori. Like, go for it.
Yep. So science or fiction, we're putting this in the column of science. It's real science to have to actually go out there and develop your mindset and skills. It's not going to happen for you. So as always, guys, we appreciate your time. We're going to be back here for other categories in the Diet Doc Life Mastery podcast. So we look forward to your comments and shares and likes and all that good stuff. And we will see you next time.
Thanks, guys.